this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 14 of the House of Commons Committee on Finance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. En ce qui concerne l'interprétation.
As for interpretation, for those on Zoom, on the bottom of your screen, you can choose between floor English and French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel.
Via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The committee clerks and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated speaking order. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Monday, September 22nd, 2025, the committee shall resume its study on the use of offshore tax havens. I would like to now welcome our witnesses. Bienvenue au Monsieur Alain.
Welcome to Mr. Alain Deneau, a professor.
As well as Jason Ward, Principal Analyst at the Center for International Corporate Tax Accountability and Research. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to questions. Monsieur Deneau, on va commencer avec...
Mr. Deneau, we will start with you. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. First, I would like to note that I am an ethics professor at the University of Moncton. I've worked actively on tax havens up until 2015 for a 20-year period. I've also studied historiography, ethics, and concepts pertaining to tax havens and what I call more broadly a sovereignty of complicity. I would mostly like to focus on the social costs of the use of tax havens, especially by multinationals. We can look at this from two different lenses. First, the cost of tax havens for the national community, the domestic community. I can list 6 points about this, both qualitative and quantitative. This will give us a portrait of the situation. First, tax havens represent a cost for the public because, of course, capital generated here is not taxed. Capital, which, under the law, ought to be submitted to the CRA. So the money does not go into the public coffers. Billions go missing every year due to the accounting practices of major corporations. That's the first societal cost. The second is the issue of dumping, an issue involving between traditional states and tax havens. Traditional states, for 45 years now, have been trying to reduce corporate taxes in order to compete with tax havens. So instead of fighting tax havens, they are trying to compete on a level playing field with them. To compete with a tax haven, one must constantly bring down the corporate tax rate, representing a second societal cost on the public coffers. This is true in more or less all of the OECD countries. Third, there's a real scandal about debt servicing costs. At the end of a financial year, if the state cannot balance its budget, it will borrow from jurisdictions that do not tax at a sufficient level to bail out their businesses. Thus, we see businesses having to subsidize social costs. And money goes from out of the pockets of the people and in the goal of helping Canada balance its costs, its spending book. Then there is the taxation of small businesses and the middle class. Everyone pays taxes, including the proletariat. And because they are somewhat over a barrel, they are forced to pay greater taxes, including sales taxes. The fifth cost is the disappearance of public services. When a state cannot balance its ledgers, it must make cuts to services that the people need, services that have been around for a certain number of years go missing. And then sixth, there is the pricing of services. Public services are assigned a cost, meaning that the public has to pay for them twice, once via taxes and once when they use them. All of this means that we cannot truly assign a specific number to tax havens. If we imagine a world without tax havens, where multinationals paid at home, where they do their business, and where they were adequately taxed, well, public debt would be lower, taxes on the middle class would be lower, public services would be more numerous, and they would be free. Mr. Deneau, if you could please wrap up quickly. Yes, 2 solutions in 1 sentence. It must be a political and diplomatic solution instead of a technical one. There is a technical approach, however, taxing the consolidated budget book.
Hello. Sorry. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a witness. I hope you can hear me. My name is Jason Ward. I'm the founder and the principal analyst of SICTAR. I'm usually based in Australia, but currently in Washington, D.C. So SICTAR is an organization that's been around now for about 7 years, and we specialize in the detailed forensic analysis of multinational tax avoidance. So just less than a month ago, on the 22nd of October, I was a witness before the Ethics Committee hearing and responded to numerous questions in relation to our extensive work over a number of years related to tax avoidance and the use of tax havens by Brookfield Corporation. I've provided links to that committee to our previous research, which also includes several reports related to tax haven abuse by large Canadian public pension funds. And I won't attempt to go through those reports, but the links have been provided to this committee as well. So tax havens, as our previous witness stated, are a huge problem for Canada and globally. I'm going to try to focus on the solutions and not on the problem here, as I think many witnesses previously and forthcoming are going into details on the effects on Canada. I will cite one piece of research that was done by the Global Tax Justice Network and released earlier this month, which I think is a very conservative estimate and suggested that Canada over a 6-year period from 2016 to 2021, US 103.4 billion in profits were shifted out of Canada, resulting in a tax revenue loss of US dollars 27.3 billion, which would be equivalent to 3% of Canada's health budget. Almost half of that estimate is related to US multinational corporations. So moving very quickly to the solution, the use of tax havens is not easy to find and not readily disclosed by corporations, particularly those headquartered in Canada and the United States. It's very hard to fix a problem if you can't see it. So greater transparency is a crucial first step. We urge the Canadian government or opposition parties to immediately introduce legislation to implement full public country-by-country reporting for multinationals in Canada. In Australia, in 2024, public country-by-country legislation was passed, and it is now the world's best reporting requirement for multinational corporations, and we hope that Canada can follow suit. Canada has the opportunity to go even further. So in Australia, all multinationals with annual revenue of 10 million Australian dollars or over will be required to report basic financial information, including number of employees, profits, losses, taxes paid or not paid, in Australia and 40 jurisdictions around the world that are widely recognized as the most abused global tax havens. The lobby groups representing the largest US multinationals, also the world's largest tax dodgers, recently tried to persuade the Trump administration to threaten Australia over this simple transparency measure. I tell you this because it's an indication of how exposure of this information threatens the underlying business model of major US corporations and other corporations who dodge taxes wherever and however they can, particularly with the abuse of tax havens and shifting profits offshore to where they are taxed not at all or taxed the least. Just the European Union has also introduced a weaker version of public country-by-country reporting, and banks in the European Union have been doing public country-by-country reporting for a decade now, with no impact on their competitiveness, and trackable increases in both tax payments, revenues to governments, and a declining use of tax havens. We urged Canada to follow the Australian model and require this basic transparency measure so that government officials, lawmakers, investors, and the general public can know which corporations are abusing the tax system, where and how. Small businesses and responsible companies are at a huge competitive disadvantage if the world's largest corporations, many making record level profits, can continue to avoid obligations to pay tax in Canada and around the world. Tax authorities already get this data through confidential reporting through an OECD process. However, this information can't be shared and used for wider public purposes. Making this basic financial data public also allows tax authorities to be held accountable and make sure that they are doing their job in collecting the revenue that should be paid by the world's
Thank you, Mr. Ward. We're going to have to conclude there. Thank you so much. We're going to begin now with 6 minutes for Mr. Kelly.
Okay. Mr. Ward, you mentioned in your opening statement, you referred to your testimony at the Ethics Committee about the abuse of tax havens by Brookfield. Can you, for the benefit of this committee and its report, we'll need perhaps some of that information here for the record at Finance. Can you give us more information about the scale and details of that abuse of tax havens, that particular example of abuse of tax havens?
Well, we've done extensive work on Brookfield, and we've also gathered previous work on Brookfield, and it is clearly one of one of Canada's largest tax dodgers. All of Brookfield's operations essentially are funneled through Bermuda, and it has had a very low effective tax rate in Canada and frankly in countries around the world for a very long period of time, which is a clear red flag of major tax avoidance and extensive use of Bermuda and lots of other different tax havens to reduce its taxable income in Canada. The potential revenue loss there is in the billions and clearly at the top tier of Canadian companies in terms of its impact on reducing funding available for public services in Canada.
Relevant time period would include when the Prime Minister was chair?
So our study was, I think, in 2023 and looked back at the 10-year period up until 2021.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Monsieur Deneau. You appeared at this committee almost 10 years ago. You talked about much of the same information that you talked about today about the effect of tax avoidance by the largest tax filers and the effect that has on the societal consequences of this. It shifts the tax burden to workers, to small businesses, and from income tax to consumption. so that regular Canadians that pay the consumption taxes are paying a larger proportion of tax. Can you elaborate on the societal cost of aggressive tax avoidance and tax evasion?
Vous êtes sur mute, Monsieur Dano.
Monsieur Dano.
Mr. Deneau, you are on mute. Sorry. You are correct that I did give roughly the same presentation to the committee about 10 years ago. Often you feel like a broken record when you talk about tax havens. There have been reports coming out for decades, reports, evidence about the issues caused by tax havens, and we have barely moved the needle. On one hand, there's an issue of mental blocks among policymakers. We just cannot figure out a way to fight fraud and abuse. But the
limited time and talk a lot about cracking down on evasion and aggressive avoidance, but we see no result. Can you comment on the track record now over the last 10 years on making progress on this?
Ce que j'observe, par exemple,
what I have observed, for example, when you witness the information sharing agreement, is that what we're doing is really legalizing what should properly be considered fraud, considered outside the law. The gestures by state actors are reducing issues posed by globalization to mere technicalities. Everyone agrees to share certain information, and in doing so, we legitimize the operations described by the information. Sorry, I'm being so technical here. We receive information about transactions going on in tax havens. This gives it a certain legitimacy.
And because time is so limited, not long after the testimony you gave in 2016, the Auditor General delivered a damning report that revealed the Canada Revenue Agency will grant months or even years when it requests information from tax filers if they have offshore dealings. If they do not have offshore dealings, they have 30 days or the tax will automatically be set. Can you comment on how this punishes regular tax filers in favor of those like Brookfield, for example, that have offshore dealings?
Une réponse très courte, s'il vous plaît.
Very quickly, please. Yes, information can be difficult to get. Most people claiming to fight tax havens, including the Canadian government in recent years, are actors who themselves have benefited off tax havens.
Monsieur Deneau,
Thank you, Mr. Deneau. We will continue with Mr. Leitao. You have 6 minutes. Very well. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Deneau, welcome to the committee. Pleased to be speaking with you. You mentioned in your opening remarks that the solution is essentially political and diplomatic. But you didn't have too much time to elaborate. I'd like to focus on that aspect of your presentation, the political and diplomatic aspects. I'd like you to finish up what you were going to say, and then I have a few questions. Okay, I'll be quick. There is not one single solution to the issue of tax havens. But this is a political and geopolitical issue. I know that this is being discussed in a finance committee, but really it ought to be discussed in the Foreign Affairs Committee as well. Let us understand one thing. Societies are founded on laws. If we are to have societies, we must have laws that are enforced. if you look at a tax haven like Bermuda, Bermuda is a jurisdiction that voted for a law creating something called exempted companies. Exempted companies, according to Bermudan law, receive disproportionate benefits, no taxes, a lack of transparency about people involved, practically unlimited ability to conduct financial operations. But such companies can only be created if they are not active in Bermuda. In other words, Bermuda is making laws that can create entities, commercial entities, which will administer capital found outside Bermudan territory. This is quite literally political foreign interference. We have one state making laws about how to manage capital generated outside its own borders. And this should get countries like Canada and France and Germany and Spain to rise up against this. We're talking about a country the size of Saint-Jérôme, Quebec. They could be subject to diplomatic pressure. Sanctions, for example. Countries could rise up and say, this law intrudes upon our jurisdictions and we will respond to it politically. So if we are to minimize the effects of tax havens, it seems that the solution ought to come from the diplomatic side of things. And this means that Canada would have trouble changing Bermudan or other countries' policies acting alone. However, if we act through an OECD-wide agreement, then we can move the needle. And I think that is the spirit that has guided recent reforms that this committee has analyzed, including the work of Mr. Santama, work I find quite interesting. International efforts could limit what is done in these jurisdictions. I imagine we have to continue on the same path. I would disagree with you there. I'm not at all impressed with the OECD approach. The OECD is coming out and saying, oh, it's so complicated. 200 countries need to be analyzed and have their regimes aligned. We'll never manage it. It's so complicated. And then they come up with a few tech tweaks that can make things a little bit better. But we are talking about multinationals here with armies of tax lawyers and accountants trying to find loopholes and move through them. So it's not good enough to say, oh, it's such a technical and complicated problem. No, there needs to be a political plan. Imagine there are other countries making laws about how our companies are taxed. We need to create a buffer between traditional states and tax havens. Or rather, we have this buffer where money disappears. Money is given over to Bermuda, to entities that don't even want to receive it. And Canada ought to do more, has to speak out more. Because vast amounts of money are escaping, and there were major leaks. Think about the Swiss leaks, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers. When all of these leaks were coming out, every country's leaders stood up and said something. Germany, France, the U.S., their actual leaders stood up and spoke. Who spoke in Canada? Minister Laboutier, the Minister of National Revenue. But the Prime Minister did not speak on it. It was as though this was some minor technical issue. Canada ought to do a lot more. Thank you, Mr. Leitao. We will now continue with Mr. Simard from the Bloc Québécois. 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Deneau. It was quite illuminating. If I understand you correctly, you spoke about all sorts of different costs, social costs, and the various impacts of tax havens. And I get the sense that we are changing our own policies and our own standards in order to compete with tax havens. Have I understood you correctly? And in the Income Tax Act, there is a regulation, 5902, that bans double taxation. And it would seem that the government is then contradicting itself. Do you have other examples of government regulations for the Income Tax Act which contribute to a situation where we are manipulating our policies to compete with tax havens? I don't know if I'll have enough time to go into full detail, but I would refer you to my book, which is entitled Canada, A New Tax Haven. In that book, I outline the history of tax havens. The most controversial ones in the world, Trinidad and Tobago, the Cayman Islands, the Bahamas. These tax havens were created by Canada. Canada was very influential in the British Caribbean, and really, these Caribbean countries were turned into tax havens by Canada. Unfortunately, we are the sorry cause of this sad affair. Yes, there is a treaty of non-double taxation, a treaty we signed with Barbados. There was a vote on all that. I won't get into the details. That treaty would have made sense if we had signed it with a country with a similar tax rate to Canada's. For example, Germany. It makes total sense to shift funds around and to conduct business transactions with Germany because they have a legitimate, serious tax rate. It would make sense to sign a non-double taxation agreement with them. But why would we sign such an agreement with Barbados, where the tax rate is 1% max? All this does is it lets financial funds create this illusion where money is sent to Barbados, it is barely taxed, and then it comes back to Canada, and the businesses say, oh, it's already been subject to taxation, so you can't tax it a second time. Canada is the one who created all of these loopholes. We can very well play the fool and say, oh, the OECD can handle this and point the finger elsewhere, but we are the creators of this problem. Thank you. In your opening remarks, you spoke about political and diplomatic solutions. Our colleague, Mr. Leitao, asked you more questions about this. But towards the end, you spoke about the taxation of the consolidated balance sheet. What did you mean by that, and could you go into more detail? Well, we got to get out of the 19th century, where we got to get out of this idea where multinationals are treated as a single actor. That is not true anymore. Multinationals are a series of entities who can exchange debt, exchange funds, do all sorts of crazy things. All of these entities are united under a board, and they are subject to local taxes in the countries where they are operating. If we want to bring taxation into the modern age, we could look at that. We could tax multinationals directly on income they made in our country. We could say you owe X% of your consolidated balance sheet, that is all of your financial operations, no matter where they are in the world, whether they are storing their money in Hong Kong or Bermuda or Luxembourg. But in order to make this happen, there would need to be political will and a certain technical competence.
Est-ce qu'il y a, oui, est-ce qu'actuellement, il y a des États
Currently, are there any countries who use this measure? I don't know any such countries. I'll let Mr. Ward speak on that if he wishes to. I will say that all too often we act like we cannot do anything alone, but we could actually set an example. We can pass a bill taxing companies based on their consolidated balance sheet. And then we can even say this only comes into effect after a certain percentage of OECD member states pass similar laws. Thank you, Mr. Deneau. We'll have to stop you there.
Mr. Lawrence for 5 minutes from the Conservatives. Thank you.
Thank you. My questions will be mostly set towards Mr. Ward. Mr. Ward, in your previous testimony in ethics, I believe you agreed with the following statement. Please tell me if you still agree. Brookfield has been, over the last 5 years, one of Canada's most notorious and largest tax avoiders. Is that still your belief?
That is still my belief, yes.
Okay. And would I also be accurate in saying that from 2021 to 2024, there were about $23 billion in USD profits reported, but Brookfield only paid $2 billion with an effective rate of about 8%, and but if that money was reported in Canada, there'd be a 26% tax rate. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, there are legitimate reasons why companies pay less than the statutory rate, but in the case of Brookfield, this is a pattern over a long period of time, which strongly suggests very aggressive tax avoidance, and the use of tax havens, Bermuda, particularly by Brookfield, is very clear and apparent.
Thank you. And in 2020, Prime Minister Mark Carney became co-chair of the Bermuda Registered Fund for Brookfield. From 2020 on, do you have any evidence that Mr. Carney attempted to reduce the excessive use of tax havens?
I have no evidence that Brookfield or Mr. Carney attempted to reduce the use of tax havens, and the tax haven usage by Brookfield has continued wholeheartedly, and that has impacted tax payments by Brookfield-owned or controlled companies both in Canada and in countries all around the world. I mean, I can give you numerous examples from Australia and many examples from Brazil and across Latin America where that's been the case.
Thank you. And I come from a rural riding, so I have to excuse this country analogy. But we would say in this situation, it looks a lot like the fox is actually guarding the hen house here, in that we have an individual who presided over the usage of tax havens in an extraordinarily large amount, and now even he still holds shares, or one would believe that he still holds shares in a blind trust of Brookfield, where he actually stands to make money if we continue to use tax havens. So with that in mind, have you seen any serious or significant efforts made by the federal government since Prime Minister Carney became elected as Prime Minister to combat the use of tax havens?
No, I have not. And I will say that it was a really backward step for the G7 when it met in Canada to exempt U.S. multinationals from the OECD's Pillar 2 minimum tax, which was deeply flawed, but a small positive step in the right direction. And I will agree with Professor Deneau that the OECD is deeply, it is another example of putting the fox in charge of the hen house. I can tell you that the Secretary General of the OECD was a long-serving finance minister in Australia and sought to reduce corporate tax payments in Australia. He was The head of tax now is also a former advisor to KPMG, who sold Microsoft a scheme of avoiding tax in Puerto Rico, which is now the largest tax bill in the world's history. The US IRS, prior to Trump, has been chasing Microsoft for $30 billion in taxes because it shifted profits to Puerto Rico, which under US law is a foreign jurisdiction. And we've done work in Canada that shows that Microsoft has done the same in Canada in terms of shifting profits, maybe not to Puerto Rico, but via Ireland. So there are lots of countries like Ireland, Luxembourg, Netherlands that are also tax havens, as well as Canada, the United States, and the UK functioning as tax havens.
You in your testimony, you talked a little bit about the Australian example of having reporting of foreign income made public, if I've got that correct. Have you tried to socialize that with the current federal government, and what response have you received?
We have talked to our friends and allies in Canada about pushing forward proposals around public country-by-country reporting. I haven't been involved in direct conversations with the government, but we have been talking to our allies and friends in Canada to push that with the government. My understanding that there was an openness to that consideration, but I can't speak on behalf of that because I have not been directly involved in those conversations. But I will say this is
sorry, Mr. Ward, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. We're going to continue for 5 minutes with Mr. Sawatsky, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Professor Denault, so Canada has adopted the OECD's Common Reporting Standard and strengthened the general anti-avoidance rules. And I was just wondering if you could speak to if these have been effective in your view, and if this was done in the best way to crack down on the offshore tax havens.
I would reiterate that, well, at best, these measures could maybe change a few things on a cosmetic level. I don't have all the technical terms because it's a very technical set of measures, but I can provide you a written answer. As I noted, the information sharing agreement was a regulatory change, making it so that requests for mandatory information would see information given legitimacy by the Canadian state. Rights holders would be able to receive dividends from money stored in tax havens that sign an information sharing agreement. And what does that mean? Well, it would mean that the ministers are scrambling about for ways to try to convince tax havens to collaborate with us. If we truly want to attack the issue of tax havens, we must consider the scale of the problem. This is not a problem made up of technicalities that is best dealt with by technical experts. No, it's a fundamental issue about Canada's ability to fulfill its end of the social contract. Does it not upset the Canadians that there are Canadians going around without a family doctor, that we don't have enough, that we have nothing to, for mental health, our societal basis is being eroded? Is the Canadian government not ashamed of its lack of ability to fund public services, all because they simply don't have the courage to go out and get the taxes that they are owed under the law? Or is Canada content to close its eyes and point to technicalities and say, oh, we signed an agreement?
Thank you for that. And so maybe if you could also just summarize what you think would be the best step forward in terms of increasing laws and being able to do more.
Les mesures phares, je les réitère là où...
I would reiterate The state should give itself the ability to tax companies based on their consolidated balance sheet. They should not only tax structures based here in Canada domestically. Companies submit balance sheets to their stakeholders every year where they add up all the capital and all the revenue of all of the entities under their umbrella. But legally speaking, all of these entities are not considered only one. The idea of a consolidated entity is like Santa Claus. From a legal perspective, we insist on taxing all of these entities individually, one by one, without taking the others into account. Just theoretically, we should be able to say, hey, multinationals actually exist, and that would raise eyebrows in the year 2025. That's the point we're at. We should be able to say multinationals exist, and they are subject to the laws. We should not be treating them as though they were a series of independent branches, some here, some there. If we could acknowledge reality, we would be able to take into account all of the activities of a multinational, not just the ones based here. I cannot divide myself into 3,000 pieces and say, oh, go speak to one of the 3,000th pieces if you want to know about me. That doesn't make any sense. And that's why the legislature should take action, because after all, it is your responsibility.
Thank you. And we've had some previous witnesses mention how sometimes with statements of public income that can raise privacy concerns and sometimes even increase a risk of kidnapping and that sort of thing. I was just wondering if you could comment on that, and is there any ways we can mitigate those concerns?
Unfortunately, we'll have to hear your response another time because that concludes the 5 minutes for us. Mais on va continuer avec Monsieur Simard pour deux.
We will continue with Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. I hope I'm not speaking to only 1/3,000th of you, Mr. Deneau. I very much appreciated earlier when you spoke about the disappearance of public services. I'll ask a question that may seem a little silly, but here it is. Who truly is contributing to fund the state? Because there's a certain level of cynicism. The public thinks that they pay too much for the services they get. And when I look at what you talked about in your opening statement, social costs, dumping, the costs, debt servicing costs, and the disappearance of public services, I begin to understand the scale of public cynicism about public services. So here it is. Who is actually funding the state these days? Before I get into it, I would also like to talk about, I would add a question to your question. Who benefits from public services? I mean, who are multinationals? They benefit from public services, airports, roads, the police, the legal system, a workforce educated by the state, job creation subsidies, practically free electricity. And despite benefiting, they refuse to pay into the system. Instead, the middle class ends up paying. And the proletariat, whom we talk about too little, they pay 15% every time they make a purchase of even some items required for basic existence. The time has come to stop thinking of taxpayers as individual people. Politicians always say, oh, the taxpayers are taxed too much. We cannot add another tax onto their shoulders. No, we ought to look at the tax base as a whole. And when you look at it that way, you see that companies only subsidize about 10% of the state. We're going to stop you there. Sorry about that. It's a shorter round. Thank you, Mr. Simard.
Minutes, please.
Oh, I was going to go, but
Go ahead.
okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to be back at the Finance Committee for this study of tax havens. Just to set the context a bit, tax havens are when rich and well-connected people and companies develop creative structures to try to avoid taxes. Tax avoidance is legal, but governments should try to prevent structures for tax avoidance that allow wealthy and well-connected people to exploit loopholes that aren't available to normal people. I think a lot of these issues are technical in nature, which means trust is very important, that the public can trust that their leaders are on their side, trying to solve these problems, trying to make the system more fair, and that they're not playing for the other team. Which is why when you have a prime minister or other leaders that are personally invested in tax havens and that benefit from the continuing existence of these tax avoidance structures, that obviously creates problems for trust. They are personally invested in outcomes that are contrary to the public interest, contrary to what most people would want, which is solutions to the problems of aggressive tax avoidance, keeping money out of the system, and effectively requiring everyday hardworking Canadians to pay more taxes. Mr. Ward, you've done a lot of work specifically on Brookfield, as we've discussed, which used to be a company the Prime Minister led and that he's still invested in. I wonder if you could speak to the issues of trust and conflict of interest around having a prime minister, having leaders in general who are on the one hand maybe professing to be concerned about these problems, but on the other hand are personally invested in the continuing existence of structures that allow tax avoidance for their own advantage.
Well, I mean, to piggyback on comments made by Professor Deneau, I mean, I think trust is deeply undermined. I think the general public in Canada is widely aware that some of the largest multinationals, Brookfield included, and lots of U.S. multinationals, pay such low tax rates when workers who get paycheck and payroll deduction of their taxes pay full freight and expect more for their dollar from public services. It completely undermines trust in the system if you have small business operators who can't afford to hire big four accounting firms, who can't afford to hire a team of tax lawyers, who can't set up Swiss bank accounts and tax haven subsidiaries. They're paying the bills for the big corporations that are using those same services, and it completely undermines trust in the tax system and in public institutions overall. I think this is the reason why you have people like Donald Trump and Bolsonaro, because people have been impacted negatively by globalization, whereas they can see that the richest and most powerful in the world are benefiting from this system that they designed, they continue to influence, and they continue to write the rules on. And I think, I completely agree with Mr. Deneau in terms of a unitary taxation where you're looking at a company as its whole and taxing it as a whole entity. And that does happen in 27 United States. And there's an opportunity to close a loophole in those states so that they're not able to shift income offshore and that income. So there's a model that exists. This was part of the OECD Pillar 1 proposal, a small part of it. So it's been legitimized as a practice. And it really needs to carry forward. And I think,
thank you. Can I just for a further point of precision in the minute or so I have left? So what you're describing is people that are designing the rules and also personally benefiting from the rules, allowing tax havens to continue to operate. What you have with Mark Carney being our prime minister, coming from Brookfield, continuing to be invested in Brookfield, it's effectively like having someone say, okay, now I'm the referee, now I'm adjudicating the system, or supposed to be adjudicating the system in public interest, but I'm still on the payroll of one of the teams, right? It's got someone coming from Brookfield, benefiting financially from Brookfield using these aggressive tax avoidance structures while in a position where they're supposed to be defending the public interest, but they're personally invested in an outcome that is at best partisan to one side of it, but likely is contrary to the public interest and the common good in general.
Very brief response, please. You have 5 seconds.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you have to have trust in the system, and that if Mark Carney wants to come clean as the Prime Minister and move forward on this, I think that the government should be putting forward legislation on public country-by-country
Okay,
reporting.
thank you, Mr. Ward. Thank you. That concludes the time. We'll continue with Mr. Turnbull, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks to the witnesses for being here, and it's good discussion today. I want to try and just ground our discussion here in some facts, which is that, you know, from my perspective, the government has done quite a number of things over the last decade to address these issues, and I think we should all acknowledge that there are some good steps that have been taken. For example, Canada implemented Pillar 2 by enacting the Global Minimum Tax Act effective beginning in 2024. The government also announced its intention to implement the secondary backstop rule known as the undertax profits rule, which would be effective December 31st, 2024. We also have moved forward with country-by-country reporting. That's Action 13, introduced in Canada with effect as of 2016. New limitations on interest deductibility, Action 4, were implemented in Canada under the excessive interest and financing expenses limitation rules effective October 2023. We also moved forward with new hybrid mismatch arrangements, which is Action 2, adopted in Canada with effect as of 2023. Enhanced mandatory disclosure rules, Action 12, were announced in Budget 2021 and received royal assent in 2023. Exchanges between the CRA and other tax authorities of certain tax rulings that could give rise to base erosion and profit shifting concerns have also been moved forward with, which is Action 5. Enactment in 2019 of the base erosion and profit shifting multilateral instrument, Action 15, were moved forward with, and Canada has endorsed the changes made to the OECD's transfer pricing guidelines. Budget 2025 also includes modernization of Canada's transfer pricing rules. It's including administrative improvements, strengthening the general anti-avoidance rule as well, crypto asset reporting framework, the common report and a common reporting standard, which would be effective January 1st, 2027. We've also moving forward with the global minimum tax with a number of amendments to that act, which I think are positive steps in the right direction. We've limited the deferral of refundable tax on investment income, or rather, I should say, in Budget 2025, intend to do so. We're also moving forward in Budget 2025 with Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act, and a Financial Crimes Agency, which will lead enforcement on financial crimes, including money laundering and complex financial crimes, often linked to offshore tax evasion. So those are a series of things that this government has done, and I want both of you to acknowledge that those are steps in the right direction, if you're willing to. Obviously, it's up to you, but I think those are steps, positive steps in the right direction. I understand that you want us to do more. You're very knowledgeable about this subject matter, but can you at least acknowledge the government has done some good things for us? Mr. Deneau, and then Mr. Ward, short answer, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Quick answer. There are 3 indicators that matter. The first is direct foreign investment. Are multinational businesses still actively transferring assets to countries considered offshore tax havens per Statistics Canada? You could look at the top 10 countries.
Interrupt you, but could I just get you to answer yes or no whether you think that those things that I listed were positive steps in the right direction? That was the question that I asked.
C'est de la gesticulation parce que il n'y a pas de conséquences.
Well, there are no consequences from the point of view of tax revenues, allowing that would allow Canada to put in place programs that match people's expectations. Countries are still transferring profits abroad. The tax base is still being largely funded by the middle class, and social programs remain underfunded.
Okay. Mr. Ward, would you be able to answer with a short answer, yes or no?
There has been progress, but it's not nearly enough. And some of the progress has recently been unwound with basically the death of OECD's Pillar 2, the minimum tax, with exempting the US makes it pretty useless. And Pillar 1, which was aimed at the largest companies in the world, is dead because of the US won't adopt it. So there's been some steps forward and several steps backward as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That concludes the time. I'd like to thank the witnesses on behalf of the committee for your appearances today. We will take a short break as we bring on the witnesses for the next section of today's meeting. So I will suspend very briefly. Thank you. this meeting back to order. We will resume. I would like to take a moment to welcome, if we could just ask everyone to please quiet down. Thank you. I'd like to welcome our second set of witnesses for today, Silas Schwereb, an economist for Canadians for Tax Fairness, and Sasha Caldera, the campaign director, Beneficial Ownership Project at Impact Transforming Natural Resource Management. All virtual witnesses have conducted a mandatory witness onboarding test, and I would like to make a few comments just for the benefit of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. You will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will turn to the committee members for questions. So we will begin with Silas for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My name is Silas Schwereb, and I'm an economist and policy analyst with Canadians for Tax Fairness. I'll begin my remarks today by explaining why we think that tax havens matter. I think that the use of tax havens matters because they destroy any semblance of a level playing field in the economy, and Canadians are aware of this. On a radio show during the election when Brookfield was the talk of the town, a host asked me why it was legal for mega corporations and the ultra-wealthy to shelter their income abroad, but not for working Canadians and small businesses. And afterwards, I felt a bit ridiculous because I tried to explain that, well, technically the laws applied equally to people like us and mega corporations. Because she's right. What does it matter if on paper the same laws apply, if one group has millions of dollars to hire expensive lawyers to exploit the laws to the maximum, and the other group doesn't even know the laws exist? So this needs to change. Our tax laws, other witnesses have mentioned, should be based on clear principles that are openly and democratically debated. For this, we need transparency. We need to know how much revenue is being lost and where. We need to understand the latest strategies that multinationals are using to avoid taxes. Right now, unfortunately, it's really difficult to estimate precisely how much profits are shifted abroad every year and how much tax revenue we're losing. A Tax Justice Network report estimated that Canada loses about $15 billion in tax revenue a year to corporate profit shifting and undeclared offshore wealth. Again, it's uncertain, but if this is accurate, this is enough revenue to fully fund the long-awaited single-payer National Pharmacare program and our recently implemented dental care program. So Canadians deserve better than the system as it is. We deserve to see the data for ourselves. We deserve a tax system where the spirit of our laws is upheld rather than just a letter. Of course, some meaningful reforms like the Global Minimum Tax Act and reforms to the GAR have been implemented over the past few years. These are welcome steps, but from the data currently available, there's no evidence that the problem's getting better. In fact, it's only getting worse. StatsCan data shows that in 2024, Canadian multinationals and wealthy individuals held over $682 billion in 15 tax havens alone. And this is a 165% increase over the past decade. And in case there's any doubt as to whether this is real, tangible investment, Canada has more investment in these 15 tax havens, which are home to only about 50 million people, than the rest of the world combined if we exclude the United States, where over 7.5 billion people reside. So what can we do to fix this? We can close the loophole that allows corporations to return profits from tax havens to Canada tax-free. I think this has also already been mentioned in this committee. This favorable tax treatment was originally restricted to countries with which Canada had a comprehensive tax treaty, but a regulatory change in 2009 opened the door to much wider tax avoidance by extending this favorable treatment to countries with which we only had a tax information exchange agreement, which is a much simpler document that doesn't ensure alignment between our tax systems. We can also expand transparency through public country-by-country reporting, another thing that's come up already. Again, this is something that's already been implemented by the EU and Australia. And third, we can support international processes to establish fair global standards for taxation. Now that the OECD process has stalled out, as we've already heard as well, we need to support a strong and fair UN tax convention, and negotiations for that are currently underway in Nairobi, and Canada should be supporting those as much as they can. So I'll leave it there for now and look forward to your questions and going into more detail.
Thank you. Oh, is it on? Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Schwereb. Now we are going to go to Mr. Caldera for 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair and fellow committee members, thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Sasha Caldera, and I'm the campaign director of the Beneficial Ownership Project at Impact. Impact is a natural resource governance organization based in Ottawa, whose mission is to tackle conflict minerals and illicit financial flows. We have staff and operations in Africa and in Canada. For the past 8 years, I've been leading a coalition of 3 civil society organizations to advocate for a public beneficial ownership registry with our partners, Transparency International Canada and Canadians for Tax Fairness. We were successful as Canada launched a publicly accessible and searchable beneficial ownership registry that is free of cost as of January 2024. Today, I'm pleased to share my thoughts concerning offshore tax havens. It's really important to take stock of the problem we are trying to address. Tax havens are jurisdictions commonly used by nefarious individuals to aggressively avoid or evade taxes, robbing governments of the means to fund public services that citizens depend on, such as healthcare, clean drinking water, and schools. As committee members have heard from a variety of expert witnesses, I want to offer a novel dimension to the conversation and discuss an aspect that tax havens have in common: anonymous shell companies, transparency of the ultimate beneficial owners, and money laundering. In 2025, Finance Canada published an updated assessment of the inherent risks of money laundering and terrorist financing in our country. The report builds from prior assessments and notes that money laundering linked to tax evasion deprives governments of revenues and capacity to spend on public infrastructure, goods, and services. Statistics Canada estimated underground economic activity, i.e., activity that escapes measurement due to being hidden, illegal, or informal, at $68.5 billion, or 2.7% of total gross GDP in 2021. Canadian corporations possess a very high vulnerability to money laundering. There may be more than 2,000 organized crime groups operating in Canada, and transnational organized crime groups regularly use anonymous shell companies to launder the proceeds of crime. The assessment report goes further, stating that corporations can be structured to conceal the true ownership of property, businesses, and other valuable assets. With authorities unable to ascertain their true ownership, these corporations can become tools for those seeking to launder money, avoid taxes, or evade sanctions. Noting the vulnerability of corporations in Canada, shelf and shell companies are a phenomenon that countries around the world are trying to tackle, and world-class beneficial ownership registries have been identified as one policy tool to deter tax evasion and to assist competent authorities with investigations. Here at home, we recognize efforts by public servants at Finance Canada who are working with provinces and territories to implement provincial beneficial ownership registries. As British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec have already committed to or have implemented their own registry systems, a pan-Canadian cooperative agreement to advance beneficial ownership transparency is needed so there are no weak points across the country. To accelerate progress, we recommend that Minister Champagne strike a collective agreement with provincial and territorial finance ministers. Provincially registered companies can send beneficial ownership information directly to provincial beneficial ownership registries, and subsequently, this information may be shared in a centralized registry system. It is worth noting that a similar agreement was reached by finance ministers in 2017. To conclude, a pan-Canadian collective agreement will be a game changer in the global fight against tax evasion, organized crime, corruption, bribery, and terrorist financing. This is because tax authorities, law enforcement, civil society, and journalists can use a public registry to pinpoint suspicious actors. Transparency-oriented policy tools are the best deterrent mechanisms to combat tax evasion, which naturally relies on secrecy. As someone who was born in Richmond, British Columbia, a pan-Canadian agreement will mean a lot for my hometown and for communities across Canada. Richmond is one of the entry points for money laundering in Canada, and the harm done to the province has been well documented, as home prices have been artificially inflated and are out of reach for much of the middle class and the working class. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Caldera. We will now turn it over to Mr. Kelly for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Schreb, in the earlier panel that we had today, we heard testimony a couple of times, references made to the fox guarding the hen house. And this was in reference to the fact, for example, that in Canada, the Prime Minister had formerly been the chair of Brookfield, a company that your organization has identified as one of the leading tax avoiders through the use of offshore tax havens. And his financial disclosure leaves one to conclude that his blind or so-called blind trust, maybe closer to a Venetian blind trust, would contain long-term interests in Brookfield. Do you agree that Canada is a country that does suffer from this phenomenon of the fox guarding the hen house when it comes to offshore tax avoidance?
Thanks for the question. And yeah, I think it's certainly been a problem, not just for the current government, but for successive governments. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of people in power be very closely connected to tax havens. I know Paul Martin was also closely associated with it. We also had, it was policies under the Harper government that expanded this loophole for tax information and exchange agreements that allowed further tax avoidance. So yeah, unfortunately, it's been a recurring problem in Canada that a lot of very powerful people have been very closely associated with the issue of tax havens. And this is why we need transparency on this issue more than ever, so that we can really see who exactly is benefiting from this and what we can do to close these loopholes.
Okay, for transparency, a minimum, I would think an absolute minimum level of transparency might be the CRA giving the information that successive parliamentary budget officers have asked for, so that they can measure and assess the CRA's presumptions about the tax gap. Do you think it's important that the parliamentary budget officer get the information that they have asked for years in order to measure the tax gap?
Yeah, I definitely think that it would be great to have, a second set of eyes on those numbers that the CRA has published. So if there's a way to get the PBO those figures so that we can have external analysis to look at the tax gap, that would be great. And I think if we were able to implement something like public country by country reporting, then we could have not just the PBO look at these numbers, but also civil society organizations and academics could also estimate not only the tax gap from tax evasion, which I think is what the CRA is focused on, but also the tax gap from tax avoidance, right? That is technically legal, but still costing us a lot of public revenue.
One of the ways that it could be done would be to pass a bill that is currently in the Senate, is the identical bill that was passed by the Senate and presented to the House of Commons. I sponsored it in 2019 in the House of Commons. This is Percy Down's bill. It was also passed in the Senate in 2024 and tabled in the House of Commons and did not pass then as well. So I think we have the tool. It's the willingness of the members of the governing party to get behind it and allow it to pass. But in the couple of minutes that we've got left, I guess I'll ask either witness if they want to comment on the societal cost of tax evasion, aggressive tax avoidance, systematic tax avoidance, and how that shifts the tax burden within Canadian society, and whether or not either witness thinks that this creates a problem across the board with Canadians' attitude toward tax compliance. I'll start with Mr. Shreb, and then I'll go to our other witness.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely think that it is a problem, and that when we have large corporations and wealthy individuals who are able to use these very complex tax planning structures to minimize their taxes, of course, the government is still going to pay its bills one way or another. So it's just increasing the proportion of taxes that are coming from middle class and lower income earners who aren't able to use those same structures. So it's definitely shifting the burden.
If I may, it would also increase the debt load, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give the last 20 seconds or 40 seconds or so to Mr. Caldera, if you want to address the question.
Thank you for that question, and I fully agree with Silas. What we're seeing is an accumulation of assets by the top 1% and by the top 0.5% of folks who are categorized by net worths in Canada and globally. And what that does is those individuals have greater purchasing power. They are able to purchase assets from the government and pass those costs down to the middle class and the working class. And costs go up. And that's why we're seeing so much commentary about cost of living, food costs, veterinary costs, and all other things.
Thank you, Mr. Caldera. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We're going to move now to Mr. Letao for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for coming to our committee to talk about this very important issue. Mr. Caldera, I'll start with you. You mentioned the beneficial ownership process and the fact that some provinces, some of the bigger provinces, have already put that in, have implemented that. And then you talked about the necessity to come up with a pan-Canadian agreement. Could you perhaps elaborate a little bit on that? So we have the three large provinces, I think, BC, Quebec, and then I think Ontario is already on board. So how do you envision then the federal government leading the process to make sure that we have a pan-Canadian system in place?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so after many years of work, three of the biggest provinces have come on board. Ontario just announced that they are committing to a beneficial ownership registry system that is going to be aligned with the federal government system. And there's a planned implementation date of 2027. A pan-Canadian agreement in practice, all it really boils down to is provincial and federal finance ministers agreeing to implement beneficial ownership registries in their own provinces. And the design of these registry systems are aligned with the federal government's system, which is otherwise known as the Individuals of Significant Control Registry. And the information is then shared between the provincial registry systems and the federal system. So there's a single lookup function. A similar agreement was already struck in 2017 with Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau. He met with his provincial and territorial counterparts and required federal and provincial companies to document or hold beneficial ownership information internally. So this pan-Canadian collective agreement would be the logical next step. And this is what can pave the way for not only greater transparency, but deterrence in money laundering and deterrence in tax evasion. It would end up making requirements under the automatic exchange of information a lot easier, and it's in line with public country-by-country reporting initiatives.
You mentioned the 2017 agreement. I mean, I was there in another parliament at the time, and in 2019, in fact, the Quebec legislature did pass beneficial ownership law. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of pushback, but it was done, and I understand why some other provinces might feel a little reluctant to go that way. But I think for this system to work, we absolutely need to have all provinces on board. And yes, I would certainly pass on to the current finance minister that it will be at the next federal provincial finance ministers agreement. That issue should be on the I think should be on the agenda. just one. I think time is going by, but you made some references to organized crime and to the fact that Canada is perceived by some international organizations as being a kind of an easy target. In Budget 25, we do have provisions to fight financial crimes. Have you had a chance to take a look at that section of the budget, and if so, what do you think of it?
Yes, thank you so much for your question, and also thank you for the work that you did on beneficial ownership during your time in Quebec. Quebec actually has one of the stronger beneficial ownership registries in the country. As far as Budget 2025 is concerned, there are some really positive developments in fighting financial crime, such as the Financial Crimes Agency. I think it's a very good start. One modification is it should go beyond just combating fraud and include broader corruption threats as part of its mandate. That's an area for improvement. Some of the funding for the Canada Border Services Agency and the RCMP is very welcome and badly needed right now, because enforcement is one of the weak links when it comes to money laundering and disrupting organized crime across the country.
Time. It's a little bit out of left field, but what do you think of cryptocurrency? Because I view that as the ideal way of laundering money. What do you think of?
Like 10-second response, please.
Crypto is bad?
Crypto is bad, but conventional financial flows is where you still want to focus your attention on.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. On va continuer avec Monsieur Garon.
We will move on to Mr. Garon, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, if I'm not pronouncing your name right, I have a question for Mr. Schwerab. Earlier, research came before the committee and said there was a certain lack of transparency in access to data in country. Other countries, in Canada rather, other countries like France and the US have more detailed tax data available. And it looks like Canada is the ground zero when it comes to transparency and access to data. Does this prevent researchers from getting a sense of the scale of the problem represented by tax havens and tax avoidance?
Thanks for the question. Definitely. I think that the lack of data makes it a lot harder to estimate exactly the scale of tax avoidance. And we really, as Jason mentioned in the panel beforehand, the Australian example of their public country-by-country reporting legislation is really exemplary, and the data has not started coming out yet, but it's going to come out in the next few months, and that'll be just a treasure trove to figure out what is exactly the scale of the problem here, and which particular companies are doing it, and which countries are the links between that are the most important that we need to be looking at. There's already been some data that's come out from Luxembourg, from public country-by-country reports in that country. And the FX Research Institute, IRIS, has done some great work documenting all the Canadian companies that were found in their data, and showing the profit shifting that companies like, off the top of my head, Cenovus Energy is one company in that data that they found had shifted a lot of profits to Luxembourg subsidiaries. And so they were able to document, I think, over $100 billion of profit shifting to Luxembourg just from that one country's public country-by-country reports. So if we had all the country-by-country reports coming from Canada, we would have a lot more data to see exactly which companies are shifting their profits and what loopholes they're using, so that we could put a stop to it.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With all due respect to the witnesses, I would like to move the motion that I gave notice for on Monday. I will read it out now. Given that, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, the projected deficit has more than doubled since the fall economic statement of 2024, that the new spending measures transform what would have been a surplus operating balance into a deficit, that he considers that the overly broad definition of capital investments used by the government creates a major discrepancy with his estimates, that the lack of an objective definition of these investments directly influences budgetary decisions, and that the Parliamentary Budget Officer's stress tests indicate that it is unlikely that the government will meet its budgetary anchor of reducing the deficit to GDP ratio, that the committee invite the Parliamentary Budget Officer as soon as possible for a period of 2 hours to examine the current budgetary situation, the methodology surrounding capital investments, and the government's ability to meet its financial commitments. That the testimony of the Parliamentary Budget Officer must necessarily take place before the study of the Budget Implementation Bill.
Merci, Monsieur Garon. Est-ce qu'il y a...
Thank you, Mr. Garon. Are there any members who would like to discuss this? Mr. Garon? Well, just to explain the context, the budget was tabled. It was passed. Now the Budget Implementation Act is coming up, Madam Chair. You know, when there's a budget, we need to avoid overly partisan discussions. We are a committee. We should study the Budget Implementation Act step by step, and to do that, you need to start out in the right way. And what's the best way to do that? Bring in an independent officer of Parliament, someone who is not from the government, who is an agent of Parliament, and that person is the Parliamentary Budget Officer. We have all been working with the PBO for years now. We know that the Parliamentary Budget Office is full of independent, capable people who work for us. We're their client. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has given some criticism about the budget, and there's two ways we could react to that. First, we could do the Donald Trump reaction and attack the PBO, just like people attack judges and commissioners and agents of Parliament. That's the last thing we want. We do not want to behave like some people do south of the border. People who have a blatant lack of respect for institutions. We do not want to do that with the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Instead, we should be asking questions about his methodology. There's new methods used in the budget, and I'm not against innovation. I'm not against new ways to categorize things. I've spoken about this with Mr. Turnbull, with my Conservative colleagues. The budgetary data is being presented in an innovative way, but we do need to understand the ins and outs of this. In my view, the definitions used by the government do not align with what is used in Great Britain. They're not aligned with what is used in Singapore. They're not in line with generally accepted accounting principles. If a private business used the budget's definition, they wouldn't get their financial statement signed by an accountant, unless that accountant was willing to get kicked out of their professional body. We've met with officials from the government in camera. We've sensed a certain discomfort, and we really need to bring in PBO and start the conversation about the budget on the right foot. It's the first thing that should be on our list. It should be before any other discussion in this committee of the Budget Implementation Act. This is a non-partisan motion. After all, what is in the text of the motion is more or less just a summary of the PBO's report. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Well, thanks to my colleague for his remarks. Last time the PBO, the interim PBO, I should say, and clarify, and he hasn't, taken up the permanent, he hasn't received an appointment, and so he's the interim PBO. But last time he was here, the members of this committee didn't allow him to answer the questions that I had. So I did not personally attack him. I asked him good faith questions on some of his comments that he made. So what I have trouble accepting is that Jean-Denis, is putting forward this motion, but if members on this side of the table are not allowed to get good faith responses from witnesses, then it seems like there's a skewed sense of transparency. So you're looking for transparency, you're looking for debate, you're looking for a critical lens to be placed on, you want to hear from the interim PBO. But it seems as though, and Monsieur Garon, I don't know whether you were actually in the seat when the former PBO or the interim PBO was here last. I can't remember whether it was you or not. I don't think it was. So one of your colleagues was here. But they certainly, both the Conservatives and the Bloc members that were here, made sure that I didn't get an answer to my questions from the interim PBO. And I'll play the tape back for you if you need. But it was very clear that they didn't want the interim PBO to answer my good faith questions. So I have a really hard time, given the fact that the interim PBO has just been here, that when you want to call him again, that it seems to me that that there's an imbalance in terms of, and an unfairness, I would say, in how that interim PBO would be treated and allowed to answer questions from members on this side. I also would say that you know, the PBO, the interim PBO, I keep calling him the PBO, but he's the interim PBO, has made quite a few contradictory statements and remarks. So, and we've heard this, so like the latest one is he actually said that our budget was sustainable. So I have a quote here from him. He says, budget 2025 would be deemed sustainable over the long term, which was in his most recent report. Prior to the budget, he had made some pretty broad statements about the budget in public that were inconsistent with his assessment now. Now, that's not me undermining him. It's, in a sense, his own statements sort of contradicting themselves. And it's for this reason that I think, you know, we need to have a very balanced approach. I think we should have, you know, the ability to, you know, have another parliamentary budget officer attend as well. You know, when Mr. Jacques was here, he had said that that he admired very much his former PBO, Kevin Page. And what we know is that there's differences of opinion even among budget watchdogs, right? Like they have difference of perspectives. And I think if we're going to have a lively debate about capital budgeting framework, which I appreciate that you may have a difference of opinion on, that we should have a fulsome debate on that topic if we want to have a fulsome debate. Perhaps we should consider, you know, having someone like Kevin Page come as well, who, you know, has said, for example, I'm getting to that. Thank you very much, Mr. Lawton. You don't have the floor, but when you do, I'm sure you can urge us to do all kinds of things. So Kevin Page has said the separation of operating and capital spending is a reporting change, not an accounting change, and it increases transparency on capital investment, you know, which is exactly what the government had proposed to do. And this is exactly why we made the announcement prior to the budget, exactly why we've been clear about what that capital budgeting framework includes, and what definitions of capital investment are included. So I think, to me, this would more than balance out the conversation and allow us to have, and perhaps maybe, Chair, I feel bad for the witnesses here. We should maybe perhaps let them go, because if we're devolving into a debate on a motion, and it's clear that the Bloc members don't really care about the, you know, the current study on tax havens. But you know, if that's their choice, I understand. Maybe perhaps we should just let the witnesses go so that we can continue this debate. I'm sorry. No, I'm suggesting that we're not going to get to a vote, I don't think, on this. I have lots of remarks and I have the floor, so I'm just suggesting that that might be a good idea if members agree.
If I, point of order,
Sorry,
I will.
Mr. Kelly, 1 second. Yeah, go
Point
ahead.
of order. So, and this is, I think, a point of order about the practice of the committee. If Mr. Turnbull is planning to talk for the next 23 minutes or longer, then I would agree that it would be appropriate to invite our witnesses to disconnect if they wish. But the rest of us are prepared to continue with witnesses.
Well, It sounds to me like Mr. Turnbull is prepared to speak for a while. So I would say to the witnesses, apologies, but thank you. I will leave it in your hands if you would like to stay and watch this debate. But you are also free to go as well. But thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. So thank you. Back to you, Mr. Turnbull.
Great, and thank you very much. So as I was saying, I think for me, there's a good case to be made for having this, request from Monsieur Garon to be included in a budget or BIA pre-study. And I think he made a very good case for actually why this should be a part of a pre-study for the BIA. And I know that members now have access to those documents because it was tabled yesterday. And I know it's a lot of reading for us, but Madam Chair, I think that in my view, we have time and resources that are valuable, and we should spend them to begin that pre-study. It would be great to have members opposite agree to have the PBO and perhaps the former PBO, Kevin Page, as part of a pre-study for the BIA. And I know that members all have critical remarks in the House of Commons on the BIA, and obviously they now have the details, so there's lots of opportunity to get into the details, perhaps hear from witnesses in future meetings, and really start to undertake the work. I know that members opposite had claimed at numerous points in the past that they sought or would seek to have witnesses come from their jurisdictions like Quebec, and their ridings even come and speak to the BIA and what's included in the budget. They had at times even said that there was not enough consultation done. And in my view, we did a lot of consultation over the summer. I know for myself, I spent a lot of the summer traveling. And so the budget is in direct response to lots of input that was given by Canadians, and it would be great to have some of those witnesses come forward and speak to what they think could be improved about the BIA. I know that members opposite will have opinions and views on what witnesses should be heard from, what amendments that they would like to propose in the future when we get to clause by clause on the BIA, and there's lots of time for that. And I know that in past parliaments, I was PS to Finance before in the last parliament for a period of time, and there was lots of pre-study work that happened that was really, I think, fruitful in terms of our efforts and time spent. So I think that would be helpful. So the other thing is that, I think, our government has focused in Budget 2025 on ensuring that we have a capital budgeting framework for a very good reason. We decreased operational spending. We've outlined 2 fiscal anchors, and those are important fiscal anchors. Deficit to GDP ratio declining. Track is very important, as is balancing the operational budget or spending of the federal government in the next 3 years. And these, are also tied to a goal that we have, which is to mobilize about $1 trillion in capital investment. So there's a focus on capital formation, things like investment tax credits, I believe, help to spur and stimulate the private investment. We've also offered immediate expensing, and we've called them the productivity super deduction. But there's a list of things that we've offered to boost productivity in Canada that directly responds to the things that we heard from the Bank of Canada governor and the Deputy Bank of Canada governor who were here not so long ago, and pointed to very specific things we can do to boost productivity in Canada. Some of those things many of them are actually in the budget, and the BIA outlines the details, the specific changes to tax law. For example, manufacturers and processors will be able to write off new machinery and equipment in year one, the 100% write-off. This is clearly going to boost productivity in Canada. There's no doubt about it, because as a business, and I ran a business for many years, you tend to save money to pay your taxes at the end of the year. And when you do that, but the government is moving forward with 100% write-off for new machinery and equipment, or protecting your intellectual property, or helping you expense at a rapid rate, new IT, information technology, new clean technology, or even invest in research and development so you can, offer new products and services. These things allow businesses to take money that they've been saving and invest it immediately in their operations to be more productive, to grow the economy. And so some may argue, Monsieur Garon may argue and take issue with that and say, well, that doesn't provoke capital expenditure. But I think what we heard from the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada is that those measures specifically help to spur investment. And she said anything that spurs investment, that helps to get businesses to invest in themselves would improve productivity in Canada. I know the Conservatives agree with me on this, because they have time and time again in the House of Commons for the last easily 3 years have said we need to do something about GDP per capita in this country. That's going to increase the standard of living for Canadians. That's going to, see, Mr. Lawrence agrees with me emphatically, I see from the other side. So this is great. Well, what's interesting is that he now just voted in the House of Commons against all the measures that we put in the Budget Implementation Act in order to address GDP per capita, in order to raise the standard of living, in order to give real wage growth to workers across Canada that would outpace inflation. And so what's kind of hard to accept, but I understand. I'm used to seeing Conservative hypocrisy all throughout parliamentary proceedings. It's just the case that we find them saying one thing 1 minute and doing the exact opposite the next, and that's something I've gotten used to over the years here. So for me, though, I think that the opportunity here is to study the BIA, have, as Monsieur Garon says, to have the parliamentary budget officer and his assessment of what should or shouldn't be included in operational versus capital definitions come to the committee. We could also balance that out with a somewhat critical lens from his mentor, Kevin Page, who now runs, I think it's the Center for Fiscal and Democratic Studies, if I'm not mistaken, and who I think has a varying view on how these things would play out. So, for me, it makes sense to have this as part of a BIA pre-study. I know perhaps the members opposite would agree to that if I were to propose an amendment. I'm not sure, whether they would or not, but I'm hopeful. And sorry, Madam Chair, I seem to be losing my voice.
Jump in there, Jake. It's your shot, man. Come on.
It can go on. It can go on. Don't you worry.
Yeah, Kevin Page has also recently said, in the current economic environment, he says, I'm comfortable with budgetary deficits in the 2.5% range of GDP. Let's remember, colleagues, that Canada has a lower deficit to GDP ratio than Germany, Italy, UK, France, and the United States. And that's including all of the generational investments, and I know Mr. Garon loves the term generational investments in Budget 2025. Those are when investments in the economy that create capital formation, by the way, have returns to taxpayers and Canadians for multiple generations. Thank you very much. I always liked Philip Lawrence for the record. Thank you. So, actually, that helped. Thank you. I also would note that Mr. Page recently said we need a focus on economic growth. We need capital investment, he says, to boost innovation, improve our infrastructure, diversified trade. He said we also live in dangerous times and we must meet our NATO spending targets. So this is comments from the first parliamentary budget officer who was appointed by, remind me, Mr. Lawrence would know this. Stephen Harper, yeah, thank you. So former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, the Conservative Prime Minister, appointed Kevin Page. I think it was a good appointment. And at 7 years, he was the first parliamentary watchdog, or the budget watchdog, as members like to call him. And, he's really well respected. I know the interim PBO was here and said how much he admired Kevin Page. So I would propose to have Kevin Page attend as well. And I think that's more than reasonable if we want to get clear on, what should be considered a capital investment and the definitions around that, that we should sort of balance out the witness testimony. I mean, I already had mentioned that the interim PBO had deemed our budget sustainable. Kevin Page has also said the same multiple times. He said, I think the analysis that we've seen from finance, from the Parliamentary Budget Office, from the IMF last year, is that Canada is fiscally sustainable. So that's something Kevin Page said recently. He also said that he thought the language from the interim parliamentary budget officer, Jason Jacques, is just wrong, and he should walk that back. Quite frankly, he should tell people that our fiscal situation is sustainable. So again, I think we have varying opinions from these budget watchdogs. By no means are they homogeneous in terms of what they believe and what their perspectives are. And I think it's good for democracy to have debates about these things, as long as there's various perspectives and that members opposite don't try and shut down Liberal members when we ask questions, that we also get the opportunity, as is our right within parliamentary privilege, to pose questions to witnesses, but also to have a witness list. Even the way that we...
Sorry, Mr. Turnbull. Yes, Mr. Kelly?
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Turnbull. Given the history we've had around struggling to end these meetings within the rules, I want to be clear that Conservatives, that we do not give consent to adjourn this meeting until until this matter has been disposed of. We understand that there are resources to, we're told, 5 hours and 15 minutes of resources.
Sorry, Mr. Kelly, this isn't a point of order. Thank you.
Just a reminder.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
5.5 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Turnbull, you can continue.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate MP Kelly giving me a slight break for my hoarse voice. I really appreciate that, and it's always appreciated. I mean, Kevin Page also recently said, if you put the deficit and debt in perspective, we're not in a bad place with respect to other countries. With respect to our credit rating, we're actually in a pretty good place. That's a direct quote from Kevin Page. So these are important perspectives to have at this committee, I think. So I'd like to propose an amendment to Monsieur Garon's. And I'm going to read it in English. I apologize. I have it in French as well. And
J'aimerais quand même faire un appel au règlement. J'attendais que Monsieur Turnbull...
Point of order. I'll wait for... sorry, yes? This has to do with decorum. It's the first time I brought this up, but earlier, Mr. Turnbull used my first name. Is this what we do in committee? I don't call people, Ryan, Carlos... Is this allowed? Are we allowed to call MPs by their first name? No, it's a real point of order. And another thing has to do with the interim parliamentary budget officer. In his motion, Mr. Turnbull calls him the parliamentary budget officer. Is he not showing a lack of respect towards an agent of Parliament by insisting that he's interim all the time, repeating the term interim? I'll consult with the clerk.
Ni le premier ni le deuxième, c'est une appel.
Neither of those are true points of orders. Well, it's a principle of respect. I will ask MPs to wait until I'm done before speaking. That, too, is an issue of decorum. Those are not points of order. Those are questions of decorum. I will remind all committee members to please act in a way that respects decorum. We will now give the floor back to Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah. I know that committees operate informally, and from my perspective, having been here for 6 years and on, I don't know how many committees, 7 or 8 committees, that we've often used each other's first names on the record. So no disrespect was meant to Mr. Garon at all. Also, the interim parliamentary budget officer is actually the title of the interim parliamentary budget officer. That's clear. So that's just fact. It's not meant to be disrespectful at all to him. In fact, I've had very good conversations with him, and I respect him very much. So there's no disrespect intended, and I hope members don't read anything into that. So I was going to propose an amendment to Mr. Garon's motion. Now, you'll excuse me, but I'm going to read it en anglais. So, sorry, my voice is a bit hoarse. Given that Budget 2025 and the Budget Implementation Act 2025 have been tabled in the House of Commons, the committee invite the Parliamentary Budget Officer and former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page as soon as possible for a period of 2 hours to examine the current budgetary situation, the methodology surrounding capital investments, and the government's ability to meet its financial commitments, and that the testimony of the Parliamentary Budget Officer and former Parliamentary Budget Officer be included as part of the committee's upcoming study on the Budget Implementation Act. And that's what I'd like to propose. I think I've already argued for why I think that's an amendment that's, a good, balanced, and fair amendment to be able to proceed. But more than happy to debate this for as long as members want.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Have you sent that in to circulate to? Okay, so we'll just take a brief suspension while that's circulated, and everyone has a chance to receive it. wish to debate on the sub-amendment? The amendment, sorry. Mr. Letao. Okay, thank you.
Madame la Présidente. Alors,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also think my voice is giving out a little bit, but we'll make it through. So, we are talking about Mr. Garand's proposal, and what we proposed via a sub-amendment is that we would agree to bring in the interim parliamentary budget officer, but we would also want Mr. Page. We'd want him to come as well, and that way we would be able to talk to both of them.
Mr. Lawrence?
I know that there are several new members across the way, and the parliamentary secretary has lost his voice. So maybe I just would remind the new members that they can just go to a vote at any time.
That is not a point of order. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Letao.
that is useful information, we know that. And precisely what we would like to accomplish is to go to what Monsieur Garon was saying at first, manquer de respect aux institutions.
He spoke about a lack of respect for institutions. And the institution we have here is the House of Commons. And the House of Commons voted on Monday to approve the budget. And as such, it is the will of the House of Commons to move on to the next stage. A debate, a discussion, an analysis of the Budget Implementation Act. So I think that ought to be our mission. That ought to be our primary role. We ought to respect our institutions, namely the House of Commons. So, in a spirit of collaboration, we proposed to add Mr. Page to Mr. Garand's motion, so that the discussion and analysis and debate that takes place at that meeting can be included in the pre-study. I'm not sure if it's pré-étude is the correct French term, but the pre-study for the Budget Implementation Act. I really don't think we are straying too far from Mr. Garand's original motion. And frankly, I don't understand what the problem is. I'm somewhat mystified by all this. And why is it important to move on to the next stage? Because there's a certain urgency. We must do our job. We must implement the budget passed by the House. And why is it so urgent? Because we are living in a particularly complex time. Obviously, the decisions made by our neighbors to the south, the United States, about tariffs, and I'll be generous and call it somewhat chaotic. Those decisions have had an impact. They've led to great uncertainty in the economy, not just in North America, but all over the world. And this uncertainty has led to, among other things, a noted slowdown of the Canadian economy. Yes, the economy did slow down in the third quarter. Yes, we did. It was negative. We hope that we can turn the ship around, but in the meantime, the economy is quite weak. And the result of this uncertainty is a chaotic economy among our neighbors to the south. There's no business that would invest in an environment where they don't know the game rules. This chaotic tariff policy also created upward pressure on prices. An issue that conservative colleagues bring up very frequently, the price of food. Yes, it is true. Food prices are still high, but this is the consequence of the American tariff policy. It drove up the cost of food on both sides of the border. So, inflation remains an issue. It is under control in Canada. It is within the Bank of Canada's target range. But given the real problems relating to the upward pressure on prices for basic goods such as food, the situation is still a complex one, and this has an impact on everyday life, certainly, but then there's macroeconomic impacts. And we took this into account while writing our budget. We note that there's people are less willing to invest, and this has made the economy slow down even further. All of this is to say that, and circling back around to the need to do the work and implement the budget, what we're dealing with is not just the normal cycle of inflation where things work themselves out. As our Prime Minister noted a few times, we are witnessing a breakdown of the old ways, a structural shock being dealt to the Canadian economy. And whence comes the need to intervene, and quickly? And this brings me to our budget, which was passed by the House of Commons. That budget contains massive investments in the Canadian economy. And yes, there is a deficit, $78 billion. But now is the time to act. We need to deal with the uncertainty facing us. And we hope that our investments will help us get through to the other side. And if our support is to do what it is supposed to, we need to do what we are supposed to. And after a thorough study, we should implement the budget. So I entirely agree with Mr. Turnbull's sub-amendment. We do want to invite the interim parliamentary budget officer, but we want to invite Mr. Page as well. And in doing so, we could spend a few hours here in committee talking to these two individuals. And the contents of the discussion would feed into the pre-study. Thereby kicking off the process to implement the Budget Implementation Act. Something else, which is of particular importance, is a problem that has been long-standing in Canada: slow productivity. We're not seeing a growth in productivity, and in this budget there are a number of appealing measures that are aimed at increasing productivity. And this gets me to the heart of what Mr. Garon has proposed. The definitions of capital investment are unclear, to say the least, according to Mr. Garon, and he thinks we're trying to cover up something. No, there's nothing we're covering up. In fact, we're putting information into before the public eye. My colleague noted this, but Mr. Page did as well. In the budget, we're not so much putting in place accounting changes, not at all, no. We're simply putting in place reporting changes. So nothing is being covered up here. And in fact, we are making things more transparent. Because we want Canadians to be kept informed about what their government is doing. Madam Chair. So, yes, we divided up state spending between operational spending and investments. But everything is still there. The bottom line is clear that we know what the deficit is, $78 billion. There's nothing we're covering up or hiding. We're not trying to hide the scale of the deficit. It is a large deficit, $78 billion. It is a large sum of money. It's 2.5% of Canada's GDP. But of course, I would suggest that we don't look at these numbers in an absolute sense. It's all relative. You have to look at the size of the economy in order to determine whether something is out of the ordinary. We must consider whether we are able to absorb a deficit of that size, 2.5% of Canadian GDP. And, Madam Chair, I would say that this is not a historic deficit. Unfortunately, throughout Canadian history, we have witnessed deficits much higher than 2.5% of GDP. And looking around the world now, a 2.5% of GDP deficit is seen as quite manageable. And maybe Mr. Garon will appreciate this, but I'd like to take you back to the discussions held in Europe prior to the creation of a common currency, the euro. Discussions were held in Maastricht, and at that time, the Europeans said that EU member states should aim for public deficits under 3% of GDP. That's the European gold standard, the rule of Maastricht. Despite our deficit being large in absolute terms, it is 2.5% of GDP. So it is, and in the years to come, it will be lower.
Who had it? Mr. Lawton? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lawton. But please make it a real point of order.
Absolutely. I do not doubt my colleagues' knowledge and interest in the Maastricht Treaty and the conversion to the euro. I fail to see what this particular line of the filibuster has to do with the amendment that we are supposed to be debating right now. It's a relevance point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton.
That's a legitimate. Are you saying the Maastricht Treaty is connected to Mr. Turnbull's amendment?
Mr. Lawton, Mr. Leto has the floor. Thank you very much.
We're talking about the budget. We're talking about the deficit. We're talking about the necessity to move ahead with the BIA, with the Budget Implementation Act. And we are suggesting that that effort, that we include the discussion with Mr. Page and Mr. Jacques as a pre-study, within the pre-study of that. And the reason I was trying to explain why that is necessary is that the government felt that we had to intervene, we had to support the economy with massive investments, which we did. We're not hiding anything. The deficit of 2.5% of GDP is entirely manageable for the Canadian federal government. It is within reason, and particularly since a significant portion of that deficit is going to be of those funds are going to be used to invest and to improve so the supply side of the economy, to make sure that we do have sufficient productive capacity so that we can grow in the future and grow in a non-inflationary way. In the meantime, Madam Chair, in the meantime, we also need to realize that if we do nothing, what this international situation has already caused is a lowering of the growth path for Canadian GDP. So Canadian GDP is already on the lower path. It will still be going up in a kind of a cyclical way, but in the absence of government intervention and government sufficient fiscal impetus to the economy, we would not be able to return to the pre-shock level of GDP activity. So all this to say that there is a sense of urgency in proceeding with our analysis and discussion of the Budget Implementation Act, and that we do that as soon as possible. And in the pre-study to that analysis, if we can have Mr. Page and Mr. Jacques come here and discuss it with us, I think we would all be better off, and we could start then this very important work, because one should not take things for granted. Without public support at this very critical time, the Canadian economy could slide into a situation where we really don't want to go. We are having already some sectors that have been targeted by our neighbors with specific tariffs, namely steel, aluminum, but lumber as well, and then of course automobiles. These are important sectors in our economy, and this just shows that we need to get going with our own process of redirecting and making sure that the Canadian economy is on a future more resilient and more stable path. This moment is not the one to start to start imposing very restrictive fiscal policy, as our conservative friends appear to suggest. In recent discussions, they have and in recent statements in the House of Commons, they view that this deficit is way too high. So the conclusion I take from those statements is that they would rather have $40 to $50 billion less spending, so that the deficit will be smaller. But at this particular point where we are, if we have such a drastic reduction in public investment, that is what some economists that Monsieur Garon knows very well, that's what is usually referred to as a toxic austerity, and I don't think we want to go there. That would certainly plunge the Canadian economy into a deep recession if we were to do that at this particular time and adopt a super restrictive fiscal policy. That's one of the issues, for example, that we could discuss with Mr. Page and Mr. Jacques. What is their view of the role of fiscal policy? What do they think would happen to the Canadian economy if in 2026 we would cut $40–50 billion from planned investment as we've stated in our budget. So that's why it's very important to start this work. I think there is general agreement that yes, we should have Monsieur Jacques and then Mr. Page appear before the committee. I think it's fairly consensual that we do that, but that appears to be something that our friends on the other side are not willing to accept, which is unfortunate. We think it's reasonable on our side to do it that way, get the pre-study going, and get going on the Budget Implementation Act. So, Madam Chair, for now I would stop here, but I would certainly allow my colleagues to express their opinions as well, and I would return with some more comments.
Thank you, Mr. Littau. Mr. McDonald?
Chair, I would just say to our colleagues that basically we're looking at a motion and an amendment to the motion that's just going to inform us a little more on making decisions as we go clause by clause on the BIA. So what I would suggest is that, Mr. Garreau talks about the capital and operating expense definition in his motion. I'm not a former Minister of Finance from Quebec, but I ran a business, and we all know that capital items are investments and operating expenses are operating expenses. And we can debate the criteria on either side, but I think what we have to do is follow the will of Parliament. It was a vote that was very close, but there was a decision made and voted in majority of support for this Budget 2025. The many measures that are in Budget 2025 are measures that constituents in my riding or my province or Atlantic Canada are waiting for because of the uncertainty in the economy caused by the tariffs. We need to implement the investments, get on with the program of governing, and move forward. I guess I question why we're not going right to a vote on this, because we should have full support for bringing in more informed opinions. And all that the Parliamentary Secretary has amended is to bring in Kevin Page, a well-respected former parliamentary budget officer, appointed by Stephen Harper way back in the day. Surely a second opinion or more information is not going to harm our ability to study the Budget Implementation Act going forward. But I think we really need to, bear down on what our role here is at committee. The BIA is tabled in the House. There's a sense of urgency in the country to get some investment going so we can turn our economy around. And for those reasons, I support the sub-amendment. I want to get on with the business of governing and studying the BIA so that we can implement all those measures of investment as soon as possible for the Canadian economy. I'll turn over to my colleague here now.
Mr. Littau is on the list next. Sure.
Oh, well.
Yeah. You'll be added to the list.
Okay.
Yeah. Zalatsky.
Perhaps Mr. Turnbull can.
Okay. There's.
I'll
panelist. Yeah, so.
So
Mr.
thanks to
Turnbull.
my colleagues for chiming in and contributing to the debate. I know it's an important debate to have on this particular topic. We should get down to studying the BIA. Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Thank you to my friend, Mr. Garon.
So, I'd like to sort of start by saying that, Canada has a very strong fiscal position when compared to our G7 peers. For example, we have the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7. I know we often say that in Parliament, but I don't know if members opposite have had the chance to actually see how much lower our net debt to GDP ratio is than our G7 counterparts. So Canada is at 13.3%. Germany who is the closest to us, is at 48.7%. United Kingdom is at 94.6%. The United States is 99.6%. France is 108.2%. Italy is 126.9%, and Japan is 130.1%. That's actually in the budget, so it's data-based that's collected in the Fiscal Monitor, published in the Fiscal Monitor of the International Monetary Fund. So it is the latest sort of indicators on who in the G7 has the lowest net debt to GDP ratio. So that's a significant indicator of Canada's strength. And as my colleague was eloquently saying earlier, this is one of the reasons that Canada has the fiscal space. According to the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Canada is focused on growth. She said, and I'll quote her, Canada is focused on growth. The areas that Canada has identified, housing, infrastructure, energy, strategic projects, these are areas where Canada can lift up productivity. We have countries in the G7 that are in a better fiscal position. Germany and Canada stand up in that regard. They recognize that this is a very testing time and they need to use their fiscal space. So this is an acknowledgement from the head of the International Monetary Fund that recognizes that Canada and Germany, who share a AAA credit rating, actually have the fiscal space to invest in themselves, to invest in housing, infrastructure, energy, strategic projects, all of which will lift up productivity. Now, those investments are important. Right now, at this juncture, obviously because our country and its economy are being threatened by the trade war that have disrupted the global economy, as our economy is intertwined with the United States from many years of integration between supply chains in Canada. There's a process of disentanglement that's going to need to take place. And in order to do that, to counteract the drag on our economy, we need to make investments, strategic investments, investments in our advantaged, our industries that have strategic advantages to grow. And we're doing that with multiple, very sizable investments with a focus on capital investment that I know some of my colleagues are interested in questioning the definitions of what counts as a capital investment. And I think that's a legitimate conversation to have. It's a legitimate conversation to start a study on the Budget Implementation Act. I know that members would be aware that that was tabled in the House yesterday, and that there are copies available for members of Parliament. So there's certainly information that can inform this debate, and it would be great to start it out in the right way, to have parliamentary budget officer, the interim one and the former one, come and present their perspectives, and certainly ask. All committee members could take the time to ask them questions. I'd also mentioned earlier that Canada has one of the lowest deficit to GDP ratios as well. It's at currently about 2.2%. I have those figures as well here that are, I believe, very important. Japan is the only country in the G7 that has a lower deficit to GDP ratio than Canada, and Canada is at 2.2%. But notice that Japan has a lot higher debt to GDP ratio than Canada does. Canada has a 2.2% deficit to GDP ratio and has committed to a declining ratio over time. Thank you. Germany has a 2.5% deficit to GDP ratio, Italy 3.3%, United Kingdom 4.3%, France 5.4%, and the United States, the highest in the G7, has a 7.4% deficit to GDP ratio. So those are numbers that may not mean anything to members opposite, but they certainly imply that Canada has a healthy balance sheet. And experts around the world, including the IMF, including the Bank of Canada governor, including former PBO Kevin Page, have all said Canada has the fiscal space. In fact, Kevin Page recently said that he was really comfortable. He said, I'm comfortable with budgetary deficits in the 2.5% range of GDP. He indicates that our economy is weaker than it needs to be, and that we need to help grow that economy, and by making these investments that we're proposing in Budget 2025, that this will allow us to increase productivity and growth in Canada and make us more competitive. I had mentioned earlier that there were productivity super deductions, which is a fancy way of saying that there's accelerated cost allowances or accelerated depreciation. These measures in our budget have made Canada even more competitive. We were already one of the lowest and most competitive in terms of a marginal effective tax rate. Compared to the OECD average, we are now 4.5% more competitive, and the same with the United States, 4.4% more competitive. That, to me, is a good indicator of how much capital we'll be able to attract, because that's what lots of investors will pay attention to. If Japan or the United Kingdom is around 30% of a marginal effective tax rate, that's significantly higher than Canada, which will now be at 13.2%. Those are significant differences that make Canada competitive in the race to secure foreign direct investment. Now anyway, I think that we should all agree with a very rational proposal that I've made here on ensuring that we can have a balanced debate, a fair debate, that we can kick off this Budget Implementation Act's pre-study, with some experts. It would be great to also have the Minister of Finance come to committee. It'd be great to have some fruitful, productive conversations with other committee members about how we could structure that pre-study. We could certainly divide up the budget into themes and have witnesses and experts come and talk about the BIA, and I think it would be very, very useful for us to get their perspectives. I know members opposite normally welcome those opportunities. I can't understand why they wouldn't at this point, but I guess that's their prerogative. Maybe they're more interested in, I guess, playing partisan politics instead of actually studying the BIA. Pardon me, Madam Chair. Now, I know that the drag on our economy has been pretty significant. The budget actually goes to great lengths to show just how our economy is being impacted. There's a whole section. It's after the comprehensive expenditure review. It shows how we're spending less on government and more in terms of capital investment to spur that. But it also, basically shows just how much Canada's economy is being impacted by the global trade frictions and trade war that was unfortunately, started by the new administration in the United States. We've seen that the U.S. average tariff rate on trade counterparts, that Canada is one of the lowest in the world. That's, relatively good news for Canadian industries, but we know that that is not felt the same way across Canada. In fact, there's key industries that are disproportionately impacted. We know that steel and aluminum, lumber, and automotive have all been drastically impacted by the tariffs placed upon their industries, and unfairly so. But we also know that these have weakened Canada's economy, these tariffs. They've caused a degree of uncertainty in the marketplace, globally felt. It's one point in the budget we've included a table that shows the World Uncertainty Index, and it shows that investors and business owners are feeling a degree of uncertainty not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. It's actually greater than that. It shows up on graphs greater than what people experienced in the 2008 financial crisis. Now, that's the crisis that was a hard one for our economy, but I would argue that what Canada's been through the pandemic and the post-pandemic shocks to our economy, that we've now experienced more shocks throughout our economy, and this one is even bigger because it actually requires a reorientation of trading flows and relationships all across the world. And so, what we're seeing is, thank you very much, chronically low business investment, because of an over-reliance on U.S. demand for Canadian products in the past. We see a lot of these things impacting our economy. Obviously, we've seen some job layoffs. The economy has actually been quite resilient and bounced back in other ways with job numbers in the past couple of months actually exceeding expectations. And we are trying to counteract a number of these sort of things that are dragging down the Canadian economy by making investments, by buying Canadian, by ensuring that we can, spur productivity gains, that we can be more competitive from a tax perspective. We've done a lot of things in this budget to encourage greater resilience and growth, ensure competitiveness, boost productivity, to stimulate our industrial base, which we heard through the Prime Minister's Economic Growth Caucus. We've heard many stakeholders. In fact, all the chief economists from the largest banks in the country came and made recommendations about how the Government of Canada could address many of the challenges that were being experienced based on the degree of uncertainty. And many of them, in fact, we've included in this year's budget 2025. We acknowledge that Canada has lots and lots of strengths. We have lots of opportunities to diversify trade. We have, strategic sectors and industries that can grow, but we need investment to do that. We need to create certainty where there has been some uncertainty placed upon these industries. And in order to do that, I think we've done our very best to ensure that there's things like investment tax credits. Those are clearly outlined for critical mineral projects, for mineral development in general, for those projects at the exploration phase, but also ensuring that there's funding and financing options at other critical phases for the development of those resources. Canada, we've often said that and heard that Canada is a resource-based, a natural resource-based economy, and it is true traditionally, but we also have other opportunities that exist across our economy. In fact, statistics show that our small to medium-sized enterprises actually contribute more jobs and more trade with other countries, and I think that can be a focus as well for our discussions when we get into discussing measures to support small to medium-sized enterprises across Canada and continue to diversify trade with other countries, because, of course, there's opportunities to grow businesses all across Canada. And buying Canadian right now really is a core part of our strategy, because it ensures that as we move forward with these major projects and attracting the capital needed from our pension plans, from global investors, into key infrastructure that Canada needs, whether it's energy infrastructure or transportation infrastructure. There's many forms of infrastructure. I'm sure the members have seen the list of projects and the rounds of those projects with the Major Projects Office. These are good news for our country. There's absolutely no doubt that these will bring jobs, attract investment, grow our economy, and serve Canadians for generations to come. And this is what my friend Monsieur Garon loves about the budget. He loves the term generational investment. It's his favorite term. He tells me over and over again in private. He really enjoys that because he understands how important the next generations are for our country, and the fact that these investments will serve Canadians for many years to come. Young people really do need us to focus on growing the economy and unlocking opportunities for them. And I think this budget really does that. There's opportunities like in my region. We have the Darlington new nuclear project. I was so grateful to attend this announcement with the Prime Minister. So there's 4 small modular reactors, the first in the G7 that will be deployed. And it's going to provide, or the 4 reactors, once they're built, will provide 1.2 million homes with clean energy. This is remarkable progress. And yes, I know opposition members have at times said, oh, these projects were already going to happen. It's true that some of these projects were moving forward, but that doesn't mean that they can't be expedited, that attracting the capital they need to actually get to completion won't serve them well. In fact, it will serve Canadians well to expedite these projects, to ensure the approvals necessary, to make sure that the Darlington new nuclear project happens, that the 4 small modular reactors that will provide 21,700 jobs, 21,700 jobs. That is a significant number. Now, a lot of those are in the construction phase, about 18,000 of them are in the construction phase, with 3,700 in the operations of those SMR facilities in the future. So that's significant. I mean, to me, in my region of Durham region, where we have 2 nuclear reactors, we have Pickering and Darlington, which are being refurbished. We believe that, these are, I had neighbors for many years that worked at Ontario Power Generation, great people, great hardworking people, and I'm glad to see so many of them very supportive of the fact that our government unlocked $2 billion through the Canada Growth Fund to ensure that, and that's not just public investment, that includes private investment, because remember, the Canada Growth Fund was set up by our government to offer financing for major projects, to help pursue our climate objectives strategically across Canada. There's been a number of announcements, but their mandate is focused on leveraging private capital to the tune of about a 3-time multiplier to any public investment that's put in. So again, when you think about what we're doing, and this goes to the heart of what I think Monsieur Garon wants to focus on with having the parliamentary budget officer, the interim one, come to the committee. And I'm arguing that obviously we should have the former one as well, who is sort of the mentor to the interim PBO. That when the government puts forward things like the Canada Growth Fund, in fact, we're using a kind of a blended finance model where the public investment is being used to sort of de-risk private investment in areas where that's necessary. This helps to draw in private capital, crowd it in. This helps to get these kinds of big projects funded and built. Obviously, with the sort of regulatory review process being streamlined with the Major Projects Office, we've got the ability to really pull together all of the regulatory approvals that are necessary into one kind of term sheet almost that says, hey, your project will be approved if you meet all of these criteria. And that's the point of having a Major Projects Office. It's to simplify the process, which has been very arduous and onerous on many, many, many stakeholders that are trying to get major projects done in Canada. And we've heard this from all kinds of stakeholders across the country for years. And I'm glad that we've stepped up to address that. So getting back to the new nuclear project in Darlington as one of many projects that our government is investing in. And again, this is part of our commitment in this budget to build infrastructure, housing, defense, and these strategic projects that I think are going to really boost our economy. Again, the Premier of Ontario, a good progressive conservative. I never thought I would be saying that. I'm sitting here saying, wow, at this point, the person I thought for many years I had many differences with, he was there standing with us, making investments in the new nuclear project. So we had some progressive conservatives in Ontario standing up for the new nuclear project. It was great to see. It's too bad the Conservative Party in Parliament at the federal level, can't see the value in investing in Canada. It seems that they have no regard for what it takes to get investment into our country, get Canada's economy moving forward. I thought the Conservative Party, to me, was always the party that claimed to be fiscally responsible, that claimed to boost the economy, to care about businesses, and yet they voted down deductions for businesses that would allow them to invest in themselves and boost their productivity and growth. It's like they don't want Canada's economy to grow. It's so apparent that they don't seem to really care about Canada's economy growing at all. They don't want to support our business community. Like my business community in Whitby is very strong. We have roughly 900 members. I might be exaggerating. Maybe it's only 800 members of the Whitby Chamber of Commerce. But it's a significant community of small businesses. And, when they hear about immediate expensing, when they hear about mobilizing capital, when they hear about major infrastructure projects, they are ecstatic. They can't understand why the Conservative Party of Canada won't support them in their times of need, won't help unlock capital for them, won't help mobilize, won't help reduce red tape, won't help, streamline approval processes for projects. They can't understand where the Conservative Party is today. They really can't. I don't think they understand what the party of the Conservatives at the federal level stands for at all, because they see a contrast. They see the Ontario Conservatives standing with our Prime Minister, making these big announcements, supporting our automotive industry, and it's just it's a conundrum that I don't think many business operators and owners can understand these days as to where the federal party really is. Like, do they care about the economy? Do they care about businesses? Do they really want to grow the economy? It seems the answer is clearly no. There are so many other major projects on the list that are exciting. I got to travel to Iqaluit. I'm serious that Mr. Stevenson is new to committee. Welcome. I'm very excited about the projects on the major projects list. The one in Iqaluit in particular, because I got to go to Iqaluit during the pre-budget consultation process and hear from the Inuit leadership. I think I'm getting my voice back.
But if you want
yeah. Yeah, merci. I'm almost done. The project in Iqaluit is a hydro project, very exciting project. It's going to ensure that Iqaluit and individuals in remote communities don't have to burn diesel to power their communities, to heat their homes, which they do now. I think it's, I hope I don't botch the number, but I think it's 13 million liters. No, 13. I think it's 13 million liters of diesel. I'm going to check that just to make sure. So, but it's a very significant amount of diesel that will no longer need to be burned in those communities, saving obviously those emissions from entering our atmosphere, and so contributing to our action on climate change, while also ensuring that those communities have renewable energy and reliable energy for many generations to come. I think that's good news. There's no way to spin that as bad news. Every time I think, we had, better than expected job numbers, I always say, well, there's no way the Conservatives could spin that as bad news. And they still do anyway. They stretch it, they contort it into bad news somehow. They find a way. When the economy grows, they're going to spin it into bad news. It's always the way. I guess it's just something I've gotten used to over 6 years of being in Parliament, is that there's no missed opportunity to turn good news into bad news when it comes to the Conservatives today. But I really believe in our budget. I believe that the trade diversification work that the Prime Minister is obviously today in Parliament being criticized for, Conservatives don't want our Prime Minister to be out there diversifying our trade, don't want us to disentangle our economy from the U.S. and actually counteract the significant drags on our economy that we're experiencing. It's as if at all costs our economy needs to fail so that their narrative can stay in existence, that we don't take the wind out of their narrative. It's a shame that they don't really care about Canadians actually being successful, but rather just seem to want us to fail. They think that owning the Liberals is a way to, somehow support the Canadians, but it's not. It's not support for anybody. It's actually just disrupting the progress and the growth in our economy that will be achieved by passing the Budget Implementation Act. There's so many measures in the BIA. I've had a chance to go through it. I'm very lucky as Parliamentary Secretary to Finance to have the chance to dive into the details on the BIA because there's so many tax deductions and very useful aspects of the BIA that relate to so many things that Canadians want to see, and so many aspects of our economy and our society that will be strengthened. Just the defense portion of it. I mean, and defense, our defense industrial strategy, again, continues to support that industrial base that I talked about. You know, I remember National Bank when we met with their chief economist.
Stéphane Maillot.
Yeah, they said the best thing that the federal government can do is support an industrial base to grow again in Canada. Now, there's the diverse perspectives across the chief economists at our banks, but I think many people agree with that perspective that our industrial base in Canada is so important for the success of our economy. And I see Mr. Lawrence agreeing, and it's so great to hear that in committee. And I do appreciate his support. I wish it converted to a vote of actually supporting things that support our industrial strategy. And the defense industrial strategy is related to the industrial strategy, of course, because Canada can continue to differentiate itself, can continue to invest in defense and innovation. I recently showed my support for Ontario Tech University, which is in Oshawa, so right next door to my riding. Really great university that does all kinds of great work. It's sort of like the technology center, epicenter for Ontario. They're doing work on nuclear. They're doing work on defense innovation. They've got all kinds of stuff going on in terms of research and, you know, the ability to work on drones and other technology that can apply to our defense strategy is really key. But what's surprising to me is I watched as Conservatives voted against raises for our armed forces members. And I don't know how they can look in the mirror when they go home at night or in the morning when they wake up, because I don't know how I would look the CAF members, the Canadian Armed Forces members, in the eye when voting against significant pay raises that they've been waiting for and are rightfully deserving of for a long time. So, you know, we've also committed to updating the facilities, so CFB Trenton, for example, but all of the other military bases and barracks are going to be upgraded. They've fallen into disarray from underinvestment under Conservative past governments. We're stepping up to ensure. I remember defense spending was under 1%. Under 1% under Stephen Harper. Right. We've brought it to 2% in this year and going up significantly from that to meet our NATO target 5 years ahead of schedule. I don't know how the Conservatives cannot support that, cannot support the men and women that serve in our armed forces that, you know, essentially sign up to protect our sovereignty, that they wouldn't support a pay raise, they wouldn't support them to have upgraded facilities, that they wouldn't support the innovative technology and equipment that...
Yes, Mr. Kelly?
My apologies, Mr. Turnbull. I wonder if you would, at this moment, grant a suspension for a few minutes to see if we've got a solution to how to amend this motion.
It would be my pleasure.
You have to ask. Is it granted?
Everyone is good. Mr. Turnbull, you have the floor. Continue to have the floor.
So I will. It looks like we've agreed on a compromise here with an amended motion. So I think the Conservatives have a version of that, if I'm not mistaken, that they can read into the record. I'm not sure that I have the.
If I may, may I address the
Yeah, I'll cede the floor.
Sorry, one second. Let me
have
just.
that introduced.
Yeah, sure. Let me just check with the clerks. You have the motion?
Yes.
Okay, but I think I understand there might be some agreement. So, Mr. Kelly, go ahead.
Well, I was going to suggest procedurally, and of course we're in your hands, Chair, but and it will be up to Mr. Turnbull to proceed. But I understand that he will have to. The first step is to withdraw the amendment, so that we can then would then have the ability to create the compromise amendment. So I as chair, I think you would have to ask for unanimous. He would have to ask to withdraw and ask unanimous consent.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Will you?
Yeah, so I'll ask for unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment under the condition that we will be proceeding with an amendment that was agreed upon by all parties. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have UC? Okay, great. Thank you. Now, Mr. Kelly.
Okay. Just within the last few seconds. So the new amendment, which, if I may ask the clerk, okay, the clerk is in possession of the text. Okay, so I don't have to be, I'll be as accurate as I can be, but so I propose that we amend Monsieur Guérin's amendment or motion by deleting the preamble, given that, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report, the preceded deficit has more than doubled since the fall economic statement of 2024, and that the spending measures transform what would have been a surplus operating budget into a deficit that he considers that the overly broad definition of capital investment used by the government creates a major discrepancy with his estimates, and the lack of an objective definition of these investments directly influences budgetary decisions, and that the Parliamentary Budget Officer's stress tests indicate that it is unlikely that government will meet its budgetary anchor of reducing the deficit to GDP ratio. So deleting those words and adding the words in the third paragraph that the testimony of the Parliamentary Budget Officer must, we've already deleted the reference to the, okay, right. So the only other part that we add is in the third paragraph that the testimony of the Parliamentary Budget Officer must necessarily take place before the study of the budget implementation bill begins, and that this testimony be considered part of the Budget Implementation Act study.
That's what you have? Yeah. Okay.
C'est possible de pouvoir lire une version en français, s'il vous plaît? Merci.
Could we get a French version?
Okay, ça vient d'être circulé. Ouais. Has it been circulated?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, c'est arrivé. Any debate? Okay.
Sure.
Has it been sent by email?
It has been sent by email.
Okay. I will. Tu l'as vu?
Have you seen it?
She did, yeah.
Okay. I will suspend for 2 minutes. Okay? No, c'est bon? C'est correct? Okay. Okay. Debate? No? Okay. Can we pass this on unanimous consent? Wow, look at that. Okay, good job. So the motion carries as amended?
The amendment carries?
The amendment carries, right? Can we pass on UC the motion as amended? Yeah. Okay, great. Do I have consent from the committee to adjourn? Okay, there we go. Good job, everybody.